Jared Kushner pulled off the biggest purchase of a private company in history. And then he followed it up by negotiating a permanent ceasefire between Palestine and Israel. And he did both of these in the same week. Like most people, I wanted to figure out how the hell he was able to do this. So I spent the past week studying every single deal that he negotiated while he was in the White House. What I found are 7 principles of deal making. Most negotiation experts teach you to focus on win-wins or building rapport. This is not that. These are for when the stakes are high, the other side doesn't want to play ball, and when diplomacy has failed for decades. We're going to break these principles down by what happens before the negotiation, during the negotiation, and after the negotiation. Let's talk about principle number 1, decouple complex problems. After a meeting with the Sultan of Oman, Jared had a breakthrough. He realized that the conflict in the Middle East between Israel and Palestine wasn't one massively complicated conflict. It was actually 2 conflicts in disguise. The first conflict was the obvious one, the land dispute or the territory dispute between Israel and Palestine. But there was another conflict that was also getting lumped in there, which was the regional conflict between the Arab nations that surround Israel and Israel, primarily to do with access to Masjid al-Aqsa, one of the holiest sites for Muslims, Christians, and Jews. Over the past 70 years, many people have tried to solve both of these issues at once and weren't able to do so. But by separating them out into 2 separate issues, this gave Jared an idea. If he was able to solve the regional conflict between the other Arab nations and Israel, that would then change the dynamic for the territory dispute between Israel and Palestine. So he decided to approach them sequentially, focusing on regional and then the land disputes. Decoupling one complex problem into separate issues works for 2 reasons. One, can be very hard if you're in a complex situation where different parties have different interests. Separating them into smaller issues allows you to tackle them one by one, and this is much simpler. The second, perhaps more important reason is, if you solve one issue first, it then changes the dynamics of the next issue. And in some cases, what this allows you to do is approach the situation from a totally different perspective that hasn't been tried in the past. The second principle is to build the unspoken alliance first. Jared really wanted to reduce harsh sentences for nonviolent offenders. Criminal justice was important for Jared after seeing his father serve time in federal prison. The problem with pursuing criminal justice reform, especially with a Republican government, is that everyone was staunchly opposed to it. Republicans didn't want to be seen as soft on crime. Jared also had another major problem, was that Attorney General Sessions was opposed to it. So before actually sitting down with the Attorney General and trying to convince him, what he did was he built an unspoken alliance with all the people that should have been against criminal justice reform. He went to police unions and got them on board. He went to faith-based organizations and got them on board. He even went to the Koch brothers, a wealthy donor family that has influence over the Republican Party, and got them on board too. So by the time he sat down in front of Attorney General Sessions and Trump, he actually had the silent majority on his side, which meant that for Sessions to oppose it in front of Trump would basically be political suicide. All of his allies were with Jared and wanted to pursue criminal justice reform. Eventually, Jared was able to get this passed with the First Step Act. The reason this works is you transform the dynamic of the negotiation from you versus them to everyone versus them. If they're on your side and want the same thing as you, this gives them the political cover to be able to do that. If not, it's like, hey, all your allies in favor of this thing that I want. If you don't do it, then you'll not only be opposing me, but you'll be pissing off all your allies as well. So that's how Jared was able to get past the Attorney General and get Trump to sign off on the First Step Act for criminal justice reform. That was before you even sit down to negotiate. Let's talk about while you're negotiating. In any negotiation, time is either working with you or against you. The way to figure this out is to ask yourself, if this negotiation drags on for another month, another year, will I be in a better situation with more leverage or in a worse situation with less leverage? If time is on your side, what you can do is you can just drag out the negotiation forever because the other side becomes more and more desperate to actually get a deal done. This means that they're more likely to give concessions. But if you're in a situation where you don't want this to happen, what you want to do is you want to create an artificial deadline. The example Jared gives when this happened is when he was renegotiating the North American Free Trade Agreement. He was sitting down with Mexico and Canada to talk about trade between them and the US. He faced a major problem. Canada was stalling and they were hoping for better terms. But the problem is, Jared had reached an agreement with Mexico, but the Mexican president was almost out of office. If the negotiations weren't completed by the time that the president was still in office, he'd have to renegotiate with a new incoming government. Jared obviously didn't want this. So what he did was he imposed a deadline, saying that the deadline was 5 days away and that they were moving forward with Mexico, whether or not Canada was on board. The reason Jared was able to do this is because the US was Canada's largest trading partner. If they didn't sign an agreement, Mexico would have tariff-free access to the US, while Canada didn't. So this forced them to decide by the deadline imposed by Jared. Eventually the deal was done, and it was called the USMCA, the US-Mexico-Canada Agreement. And it was done in that deadline that Jared artificially created. It's natural for people to want to keep their options open. If they can keep their options open for longer, they might get more information, or something in the dynamic of the negotiation might change in their favor. What you need to do is manufacture a deadline such that people are forced to negotiate. Otherwise, negotiations can drag on forever. Principle number 4 is linking the unrelated. This is the sneakiest one and one of the most interesting. Remember when I talked about Jared's solution for peace in the Middle East, focusing on the regional conflict between the Arab nations and Israel? In this case, he was trying to get a deal done between Morocco and Israel. Morocco wanted control over the Western Sahara, a disputed territory. But there was somebody holding this up, Senator Inhofe, the chair of the Armed Forces Committee. So Trump wasn't willing to sign this deal because it meant steamrolling Inhofe. Jared realized that Inhofe was holding up his peace deal between Morocco and Israel. So what he did was he figured out what else Senator Inhofe was up to. It turned out that Senator Inhofe was also blocking Trump from repealing Section 230, some deal that Trump really wanted to repeal. Jared then pointed this out to Trump, which made Trump pretty pissed off. Because Inhofe was blocking him on an issue that was really important to him and that he really cared about, Trump retaliated, and he basically overruled Inhofe for the Morocco-Israel deal, and he gave them Western Sahara. This one is pretty sneaky. Repealing Section 230 didn't really have anything to do with Jared, but what Jared realized is that the person that he was negotiating with was fighting a battle on two fronts, and he was able to use the vulnerabilities created by the one that had nothing to do with him to gain control of the negotiation that did have something to do with him. That's principle number 4, link the unrelated, to find people's vulnerabilities. Principle number 5 is to never allow retrades. In principle number 3, we talked about the trade agreement between the US, Mexico, and Canada. During this agreement, Mexico and the US had agreed in principle on what is called the 75% rule. 75% of car components had to be manufactured in North America for it to be tariff-free. What the lead negotiator of Mexico tried to do was try to get this down to 72% after they had already agreed. He thought that Jared and the other lead negotiator from the US would just want to keep the momentum going, and they would just agree to a 3% drop. This lead negotiator tried to retrade. But what actually happened is that Jared and the lead negotiator from the US didn't agree. What they did was they went over his head to the president of Mexico and got him to overrule the lead negotiator from Mexico. This was pretty embarrassing for the lead negotiator and basically created a massive disincentive to retrade again. So the principle here is you never want to allow the other party to retrade. You want to make sure that if you agree on something, yes means yes, and that once a deal is agreed, that's final. If you don't do that, this opens the opposition to basically retrade everything and drag out negotiations forever. You need to find a way to create such a disincentive for the other party to retrade that they never do it again. And in this case, embarrassing the lead negotiator of Mexico was a pretty good one. Alright, so the deal is closed, papers are signed, everything is done. Wrong. What happens after the negotiation is arguably just as important as the negotiation itself. We'll talk about 2 principles that cover maximizing the impact of deals that you've already closed. Principle number 6 is making the abstract tangible. With the first peace agreement between the UAE and Israel, this was historic. There had never been normal relations between Israel and any other Arab state before this. They had spent months negotiating to actually get to a place where this happened. The problem was this agreement felt abstract. There was ceremony and people signed some papers, but that didn't really mean anything. So what Jared and the team that negotiated this deal did was something symbolic. They flew a plane from Israel and it landed in the UAE. And this plane had the words peace. Oh God. This plane had the words peace written on it in English, Hebrew, and Arabic. This was just a symbolic gesture to show that the deal had been done. But what it did do was it captured millions of people's imaginations. Photos from this trip went viral. People could actually see and feel what an agreement could look like between Israel and the UAE. Even Jared later remarked that this small symbolic act that didn't take that much work drew way more attention than the actual signing of the agreement itself. Small symbolic acts work because humans believe what they can see. Technically, the accords existed legally, but it didn't feel real until people could actually see it. This brings us to our final principle, principle number 7. And this is my favorite principle. What you want to do is create a framework for the future. Simply what this means is creating a deal for future deals, or an agreement for future agreements. So you've done all of this work to create one deal. But what's better than one deal is creating multiple other deals in the future. If you're ever negotiating a deal, the likelihood is that you'll be dealing with the same people again and again. In business, you'll run into the same people. In politics, you'll run into the same people. What you want to do is come to an agreement for how you'll conduct future deals. This is useful because it allows you to continue building off the momentum of the first deal. The other reason this is interesting, and this is my favorite part, is because it allows you to control the frame of future agreements. The best example is, again, Jared Kushner's dealings with Israel and Middle East. Instead of just signing the one agreement between the UAE and Israel, he created the Abraham Accords Declaration. This was the deal about the deal. It focused on 3 principles: economic cooperation, regional stability, and religious tolerance. And this deal was basically the framework or the template for future deals. By creating this Abraham Accords Declaration, he actually created a network effect. As more and more people signed the deals, it gained legitimacy. More people signing the deal meant more trade partners and more regional stability. And the more people that were in it, the more costly it was to not sign on. And so that was the final principle, creating the deal for future deals. To quickly recap, we talked about 7 principles, some before, some during, and some after the negotiation. Before the negotiation, you want to decouple complex problems and build an unspoken alliance. During the negotiation, you want to make time work for you, not against you. You want to link the unrelated and never allow people to retrade. And after the negotiation, you want to make the abstract tangible and create the framework for future deals.